sooner or later it's going to say that this Hangout on there is live. This Hangout on there is live. Oh. January 1st, 2018. All right, so like I'm trying to consistently just make progress on this Nikeza mobile so I can update my portfolio of mobile apps and update my resume and consistently demonstrate that I'm the most talented, consistently unemployed developer ever. I go into corporations, I blow people away, but I'm consistently unemployed. I want my next contract, man. Yo, Miami, why you do me like this? Anyway, I don't want to leave Miami. I've received offers in like small little hick towns like Milwaukee, but I like it here in Miami, man. I don't want to leave Miami. I want to make my money here and I want to live the lifestyle here. But anyway, I don't want to go to Milwaukee, man. I want to stay. Put me in Miami, Toronto. Send me back to Manila, Philippines, or send me to Hong Kong. I I might be able to do London, and I don't want to do any normal city. I have to do an international city. That's the way I want to get down. All right. Anyway, I'm gonna share my screen. Share my screen. Oh, share my screen. All right. So I'm sharing my screen. And so, like, let me close all this out. Let me close this out. And first, let me like just talk about what I've been on. And this is what I've been on. Like yesterday, I wrote my first view model. And well, that's actually exposed. These are my tests right here, right? The tests are basically a product of the view model that I wrote. You know, the interesting thing about functional programming is you don't have to do TDD. Translate it. The interesting thing about functional programming is you don't have to write your tests first. You don't have to do that. Honestly, I graduated to a level where if I'm doing like old school, uncool, object-oriented programming, specifically with like C Sharp, I'm sure I could do it with Java too. But if I'm doing old school object-oriented programming, like, yeah, I think I have to do TDD, right? Because it has to be controlled. It it's the paradigm is too chaotic for me to not exercise discipline, right? Now you still have clowns out in the industry that somehow got hired, that somehow call themselves professional developers that still don't know how to write a basic unit test. And well, they destroy the client's budget manually testing the application because they're shitty. And those people have jobs. Those people have contracts. Of course, they don't make the money that I make, but clients don't understand what goes into building sustainable, maintainable code bases. They don't understand that. So they keep hiring these clowns that keep effing up their code bases, right? And it's a shame because I'm trying to protect clients from that happening. And they misinterpret my campaign to help them save money and deliver rock solid software with, well, this guy, he's not a team player. I'm not a team player because you hired the wrong team, man. Like, it's about continuous improvement, not consistently writing legacy code straight out the floodgate, you know? Anyway, all right, I'm done venting. So yeah, like okay, so if I do like Control M O, that collapses everything within Visual Studio. Okay, Control M O collapses everything within Visual Studio. I could do Control M L, and that will expand the nodes. You can see the code like that. Yes. Okay. Now, yeah. So I recently wrote a view model, but the view model, before I show the view model, I probably should show the workflows, right? So like this was targeting the registration, this registration workflow. Come here. What is it called? Well, that's logic registration. Don't I have like registration or workflow? Okay, we do logic registration. Where you at? Something like this. No, that's not what I want to show. All right, hold up. Let me go back. Say targeting. No. Okay. I could say in. Yeah, looks better. Okay. So, something I've been playing around with is, we were raised to basically practice, or we were taught to write code in which a namespace is always a noun and a method or a function is always a verb. A namespace is always a noun, and a function, or in this case, a method, since it's object-oriented programming, is always a verb. So, for example, a namespace being a noun would be profile, or registration, or subscriptions, right? Those would be namespaces based on the Kool-Aid that we drank. And what happens with these namespaces, based on the Kool-Aid that was fed to us, is we don't like using the namespaces when we write the code. Or let me say that differently, because in C# you actually say using, and then namespace name. C#? Yeah, I think I said C#. F# you say open. Okay, so what if, well, yeah, so the side effect is when you have packages that are namespaces, let me start over again. When you have namespaces that are nouns, what happens is, if you're like me, you don't want to embrace the namespace within your actual code, meaning that you only open that namespace or you only import that namespace, but within the actual syntax of the code that you're writing, the implementation details of the functionality that you want to basically create, you omit that namespace and you don't leverage it explicitly within the syntax that you're writing. Okay? And so people may say, so what? And I say, you're right. So what? But I would challenge mainstream, I would challenge developers to consider that, well, what if you treated namespaces as verbs, and what if you treated methods or functions as nouns? You completely reverse the game. You completely reverse the paradigm. You inverse the paradigm, right? what would that look like? Well, I'll show you, right? So, oh, what's this? Come here, come here, come here. Come here. Oh, stop doing that, man. Hold up. So when you have, okay, end is not a verb. Um, but when you do something like that, I think R is a verb, right? When you do something like that, you end up having code potentially that, I mean, it depends on how you model it, where it may be more expressive. Maybe, I don't know. I think it's more expressive, but it also takes some ceremony to because you're adding way more modules, which one would argue is good or bad because the more modules you have, theoretically, the more focused your modules are potentially. So with that said, for example, we have submit registration. Well, let me first show validate registration, right? So in this validate registration right here, it's something I learned from Domain-Driven Design Made Functional by Scott Blashen, is moving forward, I am going to, by default, um, rely on function types that enforce compliance or that enforce the design of the vision that I want my code to have. I can say that differently. Let me try this again. By default, I'm going to use function types to enforce the design that I envisioned. Okay, that might sound a little bit better. So in this case, with this validate registration module, right? Well, this module is a verb. It's not registration. It's validate registration. And this workflow, this is a function, but the workflow is a noun, right? And well, that's different. And so this workflow will output the validation workflow function type, which, well, the function type says that it's going to be a function that takes a validate as input and is going to output a registration validation event list. Anyway, if we want to focus on this, we say this workflow takes a command and we say validate.execute this form. Okay, oh, let me start over. This validate workflow, or this workflow takes a command. That command basically gets piped into this validate.execute, okay? And that validate.execute is going to take a form as the payload, and we say registration.validate result of validation dot executed are registration validation events. So what I'm doing right here is I'm experimenting with using namespaces or modules within the syntax of the code that I'm writing to challenge, well, to basically see if there's a different way of if I could write code more expressively and embrace all of the namespaces or modules, right? Or at least most of it. And that's what I'm trying to do right here. And I butchered that too. That didn't come out right the way I want to say that. But anyway, if we look at an example of the view model that I have, it's kind of doing the same thing. So in this view model, an example would be there's a validate command and there's a submit command, okay? And ultimately they rely on a validate function in the submit function. If we look at this validate function for the validate command, hence submit function for submit command, if we look at the validate function, we see that, let me see how to read this. We have a inner function in here, but basically we have this form.email, form.password, form.confirm. And so we create a record value out of this form. And then we feed this form into of unvalidated, which basically is a converter that takes the form and converts it to a unvalidated form. With that unvalidated form, we say validate.execute invalidate registration.workflow updates status of is validated. And is validated is ultimately mutates a property, a member property within our view model that's necessary for state that other code relies on. Okay. Now, I have to be honest, there's a lot going on here. Like, I think I've been looking at this code so much that it may look so complicated that to me, it may look cool, but I have to admit that this view model, well, it's, I don't know what 75 minus 17 is. Well, 75 minus 20 is 55. Then is that, I don't know what the math is. It's either 58 or 53. Anyway, this is approximately 55 lines of code, this view model class right here. And I don't know, that it just seems like a lot. And when I look at all this, I feel like this view model has a lot going on. But the thing is well, the view model, it's not focused on a specific domain. A view model is basically the state of a user interface. So depending on your user interface, your view model is going to model the view. And so translated, your view model, yeah, there's probably things that we can do. We can probably refactor this view model to basically be a composite of view models that attack various aspects of the view that we're targeting, which is a registration form. And that would be interesting. But ultimately, you know, the state of our registration form, this is going to be reflected in our view model, and it is what it is. Now, one could say, no, it's not. You can make things simpler, and I could, maybe. So what could I do that would be simpler? Well, we know for a fact that a registration form has to have an email field, a password field, a confirmed password field. It needs to have these right here. Okay. Okay. Is validated. That is basically what David Hannemeyer Hansen, if I'm saying this name right, would say is test-induced damage, meaning that this is validated property that's exposed on the view model is only there because we have a unit test that relies on it. That's the only reason why this property is exposed. And to his point, he's right because for testing reasons, if it weren't for testing reasons, this is validated would not be necessary. Okay. He's right based on my based on where I'm at in my experience with software development. However, I would argue that this is a necessary evil, and well, yeah, I would. I don't want to say that, but I mean, if you don't have quote unquote test induced damage, well, what's the alternative, David? Like, you just don't have tests at all? Do you just manually test your code? And that's better than having automated tests that do it in milliseconds versus you manually testing it in minutes. Like, I mean, that's not a jab at them, but I'm curious what the alternative is. And of course, we're speaking within OOP. Yes, F Sharp is a functional first programming language, but a view model is object-oriented programming. It is, especially if we want to implement iNotify property change, which is an interface that we need when doing model view model data binding, which XAML ultimately relies on. So, yeah, this based on the UI of a form, this is validated. Really isn't needed, but this is validated is here. Oh, well, here's another point. This is validated is here because this is me performing forward thinking versus hindsight. Is when I actually write this Xamarin.Forms page, there's going to be a submit button. Okay, that submit button that's going to be on the Xamarin.Forms page is going to be data bound to this is validated property. Okay, that submit button will be enabled if that is validated property is set to true, and that submit button will be disabled if this form has not been validated, in which depends on this view model as the state of that form. So based on that, yeah, this is still necessary. Is validated is still necessary property. Okay. So right now, all this is necessary right here. Email, password, confirm, and is validated. Okay. The first three properties will represent fields that will be bound to. This last property is a button that is going to be bound to this, and which is going to be enabled or disabled based on this being true or false. This is validated, right? Okay. So I went through that. Now what? Okay. Well, sooner or later, I need to talk about this event occurred. I guess I could go in order from bottom up. This event occurred. This is also used by an automated test, but more importantly, this event occurred is an actual event that for a client to subscribe to. This event occurred, okay? And what this event occurred really is a domain occurred, okay? What that means is within our workflow basically takes a command, right? And will output domain events. It takes a command such as validate form or submit registration form. Like those are types of commands, and it will emits domain events based on the execution of those demands. So when it says validate.execute, if that is the command, which it is because nothing else can be executed, the validate.execute command will have a form data as well attached to it, and then it'll go ahead and take that form and call registration.validate on it, and then result of validation executed are registration validation events. Okay, so the view model ultimately forwards a command to this workflow to be executed. Okay. The result of the execution of this command are domain events. That actually gets returned. That gets returned. If we look at validate, well, validate may not. Does it? Validate doesn't trigger the event. It just updates the status of the is validated member in this class. However, what does rely on these events is the submit. So if we look at submit, we see we have a submit will only take a validated form, which is the option type up here. And right now it's none, right? Because first you have to validate it. Then once it's validated, in order to submit it, the submit will actually take a validated form value, right? Relying on the type system. And from there, it will say, okay, so I take this validated form, I do pattern match to see if I actually have a validated form. It says some form or none. If I do have some validated form, right, which means I ran the validate command on it, then it is going to take that form value and it's going to pipe it into the submit.execute command. And that submit.execute command will then, the result of that will go into submit registration.workflow publish events. This publish events is actually right up here. And these are the domain events that the publish events requires from this workflow function over here. And it'll basically iterate through all the events and basically raise the event, or in this case, I'll say it sends a notification that an event occurred, okay? And so that's why I have this member event occurred up here or down here of this ViewModel class. This event occurred is basically exposed for other clients that are interested in this event to subscribe to and handle. And that is actually done. That's not only done in my unit test or my automated test, but that's actually done as part of the infrastructure logic that I wrote. Specifically, it's done in my app logic library .navigation. So one requirement, obviously, is an application. If it has different features, well, then it may have different pages. You know, if an application has different pages, then we need to navigate to certain pages based on certain events that occur, right? A user requests something, then, well, we probably should navigate to a page so that the user can get some work done. So in our Nikeza.mobile.applogic.navigation, we actually, how does this work? we have a type called navigation. We have a class called navigation, and our navigation class actually will be aware of the different view models that we have. Now, something that may be on my list to do is, instead of this navigation class knowing of each individual view model that's going to be within my mobile solution, it may just maintain a list of interfaces to view models, in which the view model interface will expose a property called event occurred. And the navigation will just have a list of these interfaces, and it will subscribe to the event occurred for each view model interface. And basically, when a domain event is basically recognized or observed in our view model, based on our view model dispatching a request to our workflow, and our workflow outputting some domain events, and the view model says, oh, I have some domain events, let me raise an event saying, hey y'all, I got some domain events, then this navigation will go ahead and take that event and convert that event into a page and request that page like that. That's the thought process. The request I haven't really implemented yet, but again, we take the event, we basically match that event to a page, which is right here. Registration succeeded page. Well, if the event is registration succeeded, then we say page requested dot portal. If the event is registration failed, we say page requested dot error registering. Anyway, we take the event, we basically identify the page based on that event, which should be a one-to-one correlation, and then we have a request function. And well, that's our side effect, that request navigation. So yeah, that's the way I'll plan it right now. Because this navigation, well, I feel like this should be a class, because, well, we're closer to the application logic, and the application logic based on Xamarin's framework is object-oriented, and navigation, like, in order to do that using Xamarin's framework, you have to call methods, not functions, but methods, because the Xamarin framework is object-oriented. So that's what I have to do. So as I get closer and closer to the Xamarin framework, usually I'm going to have classes such as navigation, just like I have classes such as view models, right? So that's what that looks like. I kind of like the way this looks. Now, so there's a submit command, validate command, which I went over. Oh, I went over the submit command, because the submit command actually published events. The validate command basically mutates the isValidated member variable within our view model class. And we call validate, which is up here. If I expand validate, do you really have to collapse everything? All right, so this is the validate right here. And basically say this is validated is going to, how does this work? How does this work? Okay, so this is validated as a function, inner function of this validate function. The actual code is right here, which I think I already went over. Yeah, I already went over this code. Update status of is validated, which is validated ultimately is going to mutate this member value called validated form. That validated form, Shift F12, is actually being used. Hold up. Is actually being used in our submit function over here. So, okay, so from the bottom up, I attempted to basically code review to make a case for why everything in here, the properties and the functions, should be in this view model, even though this view model looks like it's doing a lot. But it only has like 3 fields that reflect the actual presentation. When it has 3 fields, when the presentation has 3 fields, we need to implement iNotify property change, which I haven't even added that in here yet. That's still on my to-do list, is to make this view model implement iNotify property changed. Then what happens is for every property that we have a backing member variable, such as email, such as password, such as confirm, such as is validated. Okay. So all this is necessary here. Our commands are submit command, validate command. Okay. The validate command, I don't think is going to be really exposed to the UI. It's something that ultimately needs to be done in the workflow. So I kind of like just reflected it here in the view model. But yeah. So what's going to happen as I think about this is this validate command is probably going to get executed each time a character is typed in the email field or the password fields. So each, in the event that a character is added or removed in the text fields for email, password, or confirm, this validate command is going to get executed. And the result of that validate command could enable the button for a user to submit the registration form. So that's why the validate command is necessary here. I went over submit. I went over this publish events is being used when they do a submit, which is over here, and submit registration workflow, publish events. So that's why that's there. But honestly, this could probably publish events should probably be an inner function of submit because it's not really being used anywhere else. Something like that. And occurred is where this is our member variable for an event in which we do a trigger down here for the publish events function here. And validated form, that's necessary when you actually submit the form. It does a pattern match to see if the form has actually been validated or not. And yeah, that's the view model. That's the view model that I wrote. So I just qualified why every property and every function and every method needs to be there. And that's me doing a code review, recording myself practicing this domain modeling made functional. All right. And oh yeah, my test. is this right here. So I have a test called registration validated with email and matching passwords. In F#, you can write your test methods as if they're just plain English, right? Using these backticks. And so in the registration validated with email and matching passwords test, what I do is I spin up the registration view model, and I assign an email to the view model, a password to the view model, and the confirmed password to the view model. And then once I have that set up, hence I have a setup region right here or comment. For the actual test, I say registration.validate.execute. What that's going to do is, well, this validate is a command on my view model that I mentioned earlier. If I go to F12, you see this member validate equals validate command, which we expose the interface of as iCommand. When we call execute, we say registration.isValidated. That is validated should equal true. That's the test. That is validated isn't just for the test, as I attempted to articulate earlier in this video. That is validated is also going to be relied on by the actual page on the Xamarin application, in which the submit button is going to be disabled or enabled based on this is validated property of this registration view model. All right, so that's the registration validated with email and matching passwords test. The registration submitted after being validated. This is different because we want to know that the registration was submitted, okay? And so in order to do that, the setup was to basically have a mutable value that we can update based on a domain event occurring. That domain event occurring should be based on our registration.submit command, okay, which is this right here. So in order to do that, we have our registration view model, and we go ahead and we apply values to the registration. Hence, because an automated test is compilable documentation, every test, regardless of if it's a unit test or not, even tests that are out in science and labs on Space Station Mir, whatever, they're all going to have 4 stages. A test will always have setup. A test will always have test. A test will always have verify. And a test will always have teardown. In this case, with garbage collection running on, what is it called? .NET Common Language Runtime, the teardown is implicit, right? We don't have to explicitly say teardown unless, based on my experience, we have some static classes that we needed to clean up that hold on to state. But we don't have any static classes, thankfully, at least not yet. So that's why you only see a setup, you only see a test, you only see a verify, okay? The teardown would be destroying the objects that we instantiated, but that's done through garbage collection running by our common language runtime, so we don't need that. So anyway, we call validate.execute first, or we call a validate command first as part of our setup. And once the form has been validated, then we could call registration.submit. The registration.submit will pretty much dispatch that request to our workflow by means of a command. That command will get processed in our workflow, and it will generate domain events to be observed. Well, it it returns domain events. That's what it really does. Those domain events get returned to our view model, and our view model essentially iterates through those events, and it matches the those events with, in this case, we know it's going to be one event. It matches that event to a corresponding page for navigation as the next step, and that's what it does. But that event, in this case, within our view model at runtime, or should I say in production, our view model, the client will be an actual, in this case, the client will be the app logic up here that's going to do navigation, right? Hence this navigation class over here. But in our test automation, our client is the actual test. So just like navigation subscribes to the registration that event occurred, well, in our test subscribes to this this event occurred, this registration that event occurred. So when we execute the submit command, the workflow is going to do its thing. It's going to say, hey, here's some domain events. And we're going to say, all right, are any of these domain events a registration succeeded? And if it is, then great, our test should pass. And you see in this verify stage over here, registration succeeded should equal true. Okay. And yeah, that's an example of writing an automated test for a view model. And this is going to be targeting Xamarin. And that is what's up. So what I still need to do is this is just a registration view model. There's going to be the profile editor view model that I still need to write. There's going to be the subscriptions view model I still need to write. What else is there? Oh yeah. And then there's a portfolio view model that I need to write as well. It's actually probably going to be two view models. One is the high level portfolio where you have featured links, and then there's probably going to be another view model for all links within the portfolio. But anyway, this is the first view model that I wrote, and I'm a professional, so I have automated tests to prove that my code works. And that's it. If I run these tests, hopefully they should all be green. So let's see what that looks like over here. You should all be green, my friend. If you're not green, then I'm going to be upset. If you're not green, I'm going to be upset. Come here. Why is it taking so long to build? You're not green. What the freak? Hold up. So this registration submitted after being validated and expected true, but it was false. Why did you not work? Let's put a breakpoint over here. First, let's see if this event occurred was even observed. So right click. I'm upset now because my test didn't pass. And okay. So event did occur. And I want to bet that I'm willing to bet that we probably have two events in here, maybe, and one gets set to true for one event, but then the last event, which isn't a registration, succeeded. We don't know what it is. That one probably ends up being false. It mutates it from true to false. We'll see though. So this says no, it says false. So what's the name of this event? Can I hover over this? No, you're not going to let me hover over this? I can't get a data tip? No data tip. Okay. If I So what was the event? Why did I get a data tip? So we're gonna run this test one more time. I want to know what event that was. And so we have submit and we have event. Why can't I get my data tip? Oh, I'm not getting my data tip. How do I know what event this is? All right, so if I go here, oh, if it's not succeeded, then it has to be failed. That's what it has to be. Registration failed. So if I could go back over here to, you can go back over here. And let me do this over here. We got to figure out why this failed. That's supposed to be failed, not succeeded. Oh, no. That's right, because I have it over here. All right, so do that over here. Have profile. And let me see if I could put a breakpoint right here. That's logic registration. Why did you fail? And this says result of. If we expand this, see, this is the data set that I wanted. And we see confirm password, some password, email, SCADA, ABC. So all the fields in the form have been filled out, yet it says that it's an error. Well, why was it an error? This is the workflow right here. It says try submit. Put a breakpoint right there. If I go to let's try submit. And that's why. Okay, I feel better now. So, and that's fine. That's what I expected, because this try file over here is actually going to be the gateway to the outside world, meaning that this try submit this is what I expected, right? And so this test was supposed to fail. This try submit will actually do a web service call to a server that I wrote. And by default, I just make everything errors. So that is correct right now, because that's what was provided for try submit. And also there's a try logout, that's error, try login, that's error, try save, that's error. So all this is good. This test is supposed to fail, which means that this test really passes. And that's what I expect. So good stuff. I'm ending this broadcast now and stop broadcast.